All right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Power. So I've got a pretty good bodybuilding history video for you guys today. So in this video, we're going to throw it all the way back to the 1800s and talk about a guy by the name of George Hackenschmidt. So you talk about guys like Eugene Sandow that were true pioneers in bodybuilding. Now, George Hackenschmidt was a true pioneer of strength sports, and particularly some of the exercises that we heavily utilize today, including the bench press and the hack squat. So obviously the hack squat named after Hackenschmidt. So the hack squat, as many of you may or may not know, it kind of looks like a variation of the deadlift where you have the bar placed behind your hamstrings and you're lifting it off the ground. And this was really first patented by George Hackenschmidt. Now, another interesting thing about George Hackenschmidt is he was one of the earliest professional wrestlers, wrestling in a total of over 3,000 professional wrestling matches and claiming he won every single one of them. Now, another interesting fact here is George Hackenschmidt says in his book, The Way to Live, that he actually devised the word hack squat from his own last name, the first part of it, the word hack, which apparently originally came from and meant heel. So in the hack squat, obviously, the bar is starting at your heel. So that is where the name hack squat came from. And there's also speculation for you wrestling fans out there. You know, the bad guy in pro wrestling is known as the heel and the good guy is known as the baby face. So some people say that the whole origin of heel meaning bad guy in professional wrestling actually came from George Hackenschmidt being a professional wrestler. Now, probably the more well-known lift that George Hackenschmidt is associated with beginning is the bench press. So some people might argue that there were rough versions of a bench press dating back to the Greco-Roman times, which was really more kind of weighted push-ups and focusing on chest exercises. But George Hackenschmidt was the first person to lay down with a barbell and press it over his chest. And it actually started out as a floor press. So he didn't lay on a bench. He laid flat on the floor and would press a barbell. And he actually pressed 350 pounds the first time that he ever did that. And that's what really kickstarted the popularity of the bench press becoming what it is today. They would obviously evolve to not just pressing from the floor, but develop benches to bench press. And that's where the bench press movement really started, was with George Hackenschmidt. Now, naturally, being a pioneer of the bodybuilding and, really more powerlifting world, over the course of his career, he set a lot of world records at the time in certain lifts, most of the time being very obscure lifts, including a 243-pound overhead press, which he would actually improve upon and eventually overhead press 275 pounds, which again, we're talking about 1898 when he did this. So at the time, that is a very impressive feat of strength. Now, earlier in this video, I mentioned Eugene Sandow, who obviously is credited as holding the first ever bodybuilding competition, and he's also the man featured on the Mr. Olympia trophy, the Sandow Trophy. Now, the reason that's relevant is not only were they both pioneers of strength sports and bodybuilding, but they both competed around the same era. So as far as feats of strength go, Eugene Sandow was probably most well known for his one-handed overhead press. Now, Eugene Sandow's record was 116 kilograms one-handed press, which is the equivalent of about 225 pounds. And George Hackenschmidt actually beat this record in 1899 with a 268.9 one-handed overhead press, or about 122 kilograms. So not only was Hackenschmidt an innovator in terms of, all these different movements that we still use today, and also a pretty impressive pro wrestler, but for that era, this guy was insanely strong. In fact, he was world record strong in most of his lifts. In fact, when he invented a hack squat, that became a world record. Number one, because it was the first hack squat. Number two, it was 187 pounds behind his back with bent knees. The first ever hack squat, that was a world record as well. And he would go on to claim multiple world records in various different lifts, a lot of obscure different things. But overall, this guy was a legend of strength sports. And even though this guy was competing and setting many of these world records back in the 1800s, he actually lived an extremely long life and actually didn't pass away until 1968 at the age of 90 years old. Now, I thought this would be a fascinating topic for a video, number one, because this guy is an absolute legend. And number two, because this guy invented the bench press, man. I mean, this is a major milestone in strength sports history and bodybuilding history, just in physical culture history in general. The bench press is probably the most well-known of all the lifts. Typically, if you're a big muscular guy and you go out in public and someone comes up to you, what is the question they're most likely to ask you? How much you bench? So George Hackenschmidt is the reason for that. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please give it a thumbs up if you did enjoy it. Nick Strength and Power, signing out.